And good day, everybody. David Cross with you again. After our last video, we left off with the DNS Listener configuration, and we had migrated a zone. And I was going to talk about some of the templates and their capabilities in this video. But I need to backtrack and go over one setting that we did not make that we should make, and then go over a couple of things I also did in preparation for this video as we move forward. So the first thing is when we did the migration, we had in the previous DNS server, we set up the also notify to notify the executive on changes. So that's how we captured the initial data and brought it into IPControl through that incremental and that zone transfer. When we migrated over to our new server, we had not set an also notify. So if there were any type of, say, DNS changes on that particular server, they would be made in the DNS cache. However, they're not being notified back to the executive. So if we go and look at the home.local zone, which is what I was just updating, there is no days update record, right? So the one thing we need to go back and do is very similar to what I did manually with the previous server. And that is go into the either the server configuration, actually let's do it at the zone level here. And in home.local and in whatever other zones, you need to go into the zone options, show all product options, and we want to select also notify, specifying the IPControl executive. That IP address, it should know to go in on port 53, and my Sapphire appliance will redirect 53 to 5053. Now, by adding that also notify, we then need to go out and regenerate the configuration. And we'll do that with just the configuration and as that option. Go ahead and tell it to do this now, stop on critical, and that'll be done shortly. Now, what we should expect to see then is once this server is up and running and configured, we've migrated the zone, we've made it the master, we're now telling it to allow updates, which we've already set, and we're telling it to do the notification whenever that zone is updated. I had also gone back in and done the same with the other zones, but I wanted you to see how this would work once it's complete. And now that we have that update, if I go back in and I'm going to remove this zone again and then add it back, and if I go back into the zone and look at home local, I should see those updates, and I should see it in basically near real time. So here's my day's update request. And in my utility, I'm just going to delete that again. It's removed from the zone. And I should immediately see that update and remove from IPControl and from the zone itself. So hopefully you can see that's that real-time or quasi-real-time update that occurs with the DNS. So make sure you get that set. And if you had tried this without the video, I apologize. So hopefully we're caught up with that. But that's something to note and to keep in mind. Okay, and while we're also on the topic of DNS still, let's go back in and take a look at one other item, which is the address match list, most commonly referred to as access controls. And we do address match list because we're matching back to some IP address or client device. Now, there's some standard built in. You've seen me select any or local nets throughout the setup initially, but what we really want to do is we want to define some level of access between servers, perhaps between utilities like my particular application, and so on and so forth. So what I want to do here is I'm going to create a match list that's going to be DNS admins. And this match list is going to be any applications or any kind of administrative access that we need to provide a TSIG key for in order to access utility. Okay, and I'm going to just finish this here. All right, and we'll submit it. And actually, let's go ahead and add to the match list. And what we want to do is we're eventually going to set up regular keys. So I'm going to have to go back in and set up an administrative TSIG key, and or we can set this up with IP addresses. So I'm going to go ahead and define one that any administration could come from this particular IP address. And I might have another here that I run utilities from. It could be in the same subnet or others. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that configuration. And I'm going to go back up now and just real quickly go into the DNS transaction keys. Probably should have done this first. By default, mine has an RNDC key, so you can leave this here. However, I would go ahead and recommend that you generate a new one once you've installed and you start to lock down the application. I'm going to add this other key, which I call DNS admins. At least I think that's the name. Let's take a look at my utility. All right, so this DNS admin key is what I want my name to be, and with the trailing dot in the name. And I'm going to use my existing secret. So if you have other transaction keys that you need to paste, you can simply paste it into the system. And I'm going to go ahead and submit that. And so now I have a key, and I want to go back to my administrative match list and to my DNS admins, and I effectively want to go ahead and add my admin key now to the list of administrators authorized through TSIG. And once I go ahead and deploy this change, which I'm going to do kind of quickly here, actually we're going to go back and change the zones first. And so in our zones, I want to set who can do dynamic updates or who can do transfers. And let's get rid of the local net. So if you're adding a new admin, it'll automatically put a semicolon and address it there. So you can delete it first and use the list to populate that. Okay. And I'm going to generate the configuration file one more time. Okay. And what I hope to see, and what I expect to see, is I had disabled my TSIG required in my application. So I was just doing a kind of like any or local nets check based on that previous configuration. And what I really want to do now is I want to start locking down some of this so that only, again, certain administrative tools or applications or other, access to these things will require some level of authorization. And TSIG is the way that we do it, and we can manage those keys through IPControl. You can then copy and paste those and do etc. So I can basically see everything. If I do the SOA, I can query the domain, but when I go to do an AXFR against that zone, I'm basically being denied. All right, so it's not allowing me to do anything because it's requiring that I have the TSIG required. And once I set that TSIG required and it's using this key name and this value, I can then allow the zone transfers. So if you're using any utilities, the same would occur for them. So another key point, so I just want to make sure you're aware of that. And you should also go ahead while you're there and define whatever address match list that you need to have for any future servers, or kind of setting up in thought of who are your secondary servers, who are going to be your other type of utilities or other applications or other external DNS that need to access the system. Also thinking in mind that if you have external providers and you're managing an external DNS, they also would need to have some type of way of securing. You could provide them some type of vendor TSIG key, and that would then give you the ability to modify that key over time and require that they update the key to continue that security. So, things to keep in mind, again, as you're managing DNS and DNS security. Now, a few other items we want to take care of with DNS while we're here is the log channels. So the logging, if you recall back in one of those videos, there's a tab within the DNS server that'll list all of the different bind log capabilities. What I tend to do is I tend to go back through and define pretty much all of my logs by type that I'm interested in. And I almost always, on the DNS appliance, put these in log and then specify, and actually I want to make this the actual name of the file, and I might do 10 versions, and I might want these to be 10 megabit or megabyte. Severity depends on the node, how much information I'm looking for. It might also depend on if I'm using any kind of internal applications to syslog out those logs or to feed it into another system. So you need to be cognizant of any kind of logging channels that writes to I/O to the file system, because that will impede on performance over time. That means especially if you're doing debugging or things like that, you don't tend to want to run your server production in debug mode. You might want to do critical or warning. Just a note. I'm going to put mine in debug because I do have utilities that do trace logging of this and can show me visually what the logs look like, and maybe we'll go through that. But to create the logs, go ahead and do that. And you're going to have separate. So you might have in transfer, which you want to have on the secondaries. And these we might just want to do informational. Then we do out transfer. This would go to your master. Change this out transfer. Do 10 of those and 10 meg each. And this will do information as well. And I'm going to do one more, and then we'll kind of get the point from there. And then I may finish those up offline. And that's going to be dyne updates. So if you want to track any kind of dynamic updates, this would be how to do that as well. And I want this to be 10 and 10M as well. Now I'm going to do this debug because I do like to see some of that information. All right. Now in my DNS servers, we'll go back to the server, clicking through to its name, and then in the logging tab, we'll then have each of the log channels. So like the dynamic updates we just did last, I'll do dyne update from the list. Also define anything, say from a query, which I know is down here. We'll select our query log. And transfers, we're going to have some outbound zone transfers. We'll do out transfer and inbound zone transfers in. And I think that has everything we listed there. Okay, and so we'll go ahead and do submit with that. And once this gets deployed to the server, we'll start then logging those configurations. And every query, we can start doing some query analysis and maybe feeding that in through other servers. I'm doing a full push as well, so any dynamic updates, we're going to lose this here. So that way we can then start tracking that. So again, keep in mind if you're doing this in debug level, be cognizant of that. Don't do this in production necessarily, unless you have a very, very high performance server. And there's other ways to do this too, such as the new DNS tap, which provides some capabilities that we may get through in some of these other technical videos as well. We'll give this just a moment. All right. And I don't think I have a shell, but I will go ahead and establish one. And 57. All right, so then we have our query log, and you can start seeing any of the logging and the clients, and particularly any kind of information around the IP addresses and so forth. So again, as we get into some of these more technical functions, we're going to start looking at other things like RPZ and setting those zones, but also doing things like DNS firewalls and potentially the benefit of implementing those services in your environment moving forward. Okay, and there's one more concept that I want to take care of in this video, and we'll just stick it with this in the DNS, and that's with the galaxies. So far, what we've been doing, and if we go back to our primary, is we've been using the typical delegation, which gives us full control over each of the individual zones, naming files, setting up any of the records, listener, and so forth. Now, we don't necessarily need that kind of control. And then the other thing to note is you then have to manage zones at the server level versus being able to reuse that information as a type template throughout your application. So we do provide that, and we do it through a concept called galaxies. Now, zones can only exist in either a galaxy, which we call galaxy views, or as a zone delegated. So we need to be careful of that process as well. So what I want to do here then is I want to go into our galaxies. I want to do a couple things, and we'll call this particular one, we'll say master DNS galaxy, galaxy for master zones. And I'm going to create one more, and I'm going to call this secondary galaxy. Galaxy for slave DNS. All right. And then in each of these, what I want to establish, and I really, in just each one of define one, you could, combine these into a single galaxy and have everything embedded. However, we do this kind of a bit to give you some more control over the master zones and the slaves. So what I want to happen in here basically is I want the Sapphire bind 911. I want this to be a master role, and I'm going to just label this for myself, and I want to enable dynamic updates because that's what we did have. And I want to do a couple things like my DNS admins I want to have as an update source. And I really want to set my DHCP up in some of these, which we would go back to our address match list to do. Right, so I'm just going to kind of keep it on this for now. What I also then want to do is select which DNS server will be effectively in this role. And if I needed to do a hidden master, I would also set the alternate name and also remove it from the DNS record, and then just have my secondaries listed as the masters. Now in the Galaxy, I want to go ahead and set up what these are normally going to be your whole zone options. These are the zone options that we had typically applied, or we did last time. And we need to allow certain things, and I have 155 in this list. And we also want to set up a notify to back again, like we just did in the start of the video, back to the IPControl executive again. And we need to go back through some of these settings here. So I'm going to go ahead and just quickly go through these. Master file format, we're going to keep this as text, full, and I think we can just get down to the stats. Okay, and this will create my master. All right, and I would then want to go into my secondary role. Actually, I tell you what, I'm gonna delete this here, and let's just go ahead and combine them all together for the sake of brevity. And in here, I want to do the same thing. Select the slave role, and then I want to specify the master that I'm pointing to. I want to generate the file name option, and in our policy that we set earlier in the application or videos, I set the policy for the generate file name to inherit the Galaxy name with the zone name. So when it gets deployed, it'll be the file name that's defined on the zone plus the Galaxy. Here in my slaves, I have basically just one slave that I want defined, and that would be the 58. But it would show any other servers that were defined. And if I wanted to add my previous DNS server to the list to then become a secondary to its own previous mastered zone, I could select it here as well and add it to the list. I'm going to go ahead and keep these and do the same thing here. We don't need to notify. We'll allow notify from the masters, and I'm going to do local net since I don't have a master ACL. We'll allow any query from anyone. I'll allow the DNS admins to zone transfer off of this, but no one else. If we were doing dynamic update forwarding, some others we would. We're not. We want to go down to the master file format text. We do full again here. And I think down to the stats again. That's really all I want to do. Okay, so now I have the two roles, and then what I effectively want to do, and we could import this in bulk or do this individually, is to add DNS domains. So we'll search the ones that we have specifically, the Galaxy default. See, now here's where the error is. They can't have the same. So what I need to do now, knowing that I'm going to have this set up, I'm just going to remove the one zone from here so that it, or two actually, and let's go ahead and remove home. How about this and this? And we're going to add this to the Galaxy, but this is, I want on this one server only, and show you how that's possible. So let's try this again. We'll go back to domains. We're going to do add. I'm going to search for home local, and now I should be able to add it. And then we'll do the same thing for the 10 or 192.168 now. Now, that's the application and its checks and balances to make sure that it's not duplicating zones, because that would give you kind of a cyclical error effectively on that. So now I have a master's profile. I have a domain profile. If I had DNS view requirements to set up an additional DNS view, I can go in and set that information, define its options and zones and extensions, and wrap these around other views as well. So there is ways to manage other view type information here. We're just going to keep the defaults. That's all I wanted to do there. And now when I take a look at the DNS servers, and if I effectively look at the zones of the server, we'll see here's the default. So this is the Galaxy view, right? And this is how we define this within the zone in any server now that I go to, that I deploy those zones. So if I look at the other server that we set up as a secondary, which I think we already have, you'll see that it's already inherited the zones. So any new server would automatically inherit, 1, 2, 10, 100, or thousands of zones. And all effectively you need to do then is redeploy your server, and which we need to do in kind of its full. And I'm going to do that to the primary. So we can deploy those zones in its config again. We're going to, of course, have to go through this error, or not error, but notification. And that should not take too long. And then we'll, from a query perspective, from a zone transfer, you should then have everything locked down. And you should go ahead and set up your different access policies for your other servers, your other functions, and things that you're going to need from here. And now we're back online, and everything's configured, everything's fine, and it's still using the same zones. So we didn't skip a beat. We just moved the zones and the way that we organize them, and we made it simpler now so that for all servers, all I need to do now is go in and add those zones to the Galaxy, which again, we can do it programmatically through the import zones and others, and have it automatically inherited by any DNS servers in the list. So that was a pretty comprehensive and kind of lengthy discussion on some of the DNS, but it's important to go through and make sure that you understand that. And from a relationship of servers, we can also go in and set up effectively key pairs between the different servers and how they interoperate and how we generate that key information into each of the server and themselves. So the first thing I do is I go in, and the IPControl always has the ability through some type of key to manage its DNS or DHCP if you want to establish that type of security. Right. Secondly, here is where you establish if there's any type of DHCP keys, which we would have effectively if we had some type of dynamic update for DHCP or for other type update policies. So you definitely want to have those defined here as well. And we'll, that's something that we take a look at it through the configuration of servers. And you'll also notice that in some of these zone or server configurations that there are capabilities to auto-generate all address match lists. So whatever is defined as an address match list, all of them get generated out to each of the servers if that's a preference for logging that. Okay. And I think there's one other thing I wanted to go back to, because we talked about some of this earlier, and we still need to lock this down, but I want to show how it works up front now that we have a running DNS. And that is the statistics channel, which we enabled when we set up the DNS servers. Okay. And the statistics channel is a bind HTML representation that we compile with this that gives you effectively named stats in a visual organized by grouping a task way of viewing the data. I guess a long way of saying that. So here's a configuration, and remember I did this on HTTP 8053. Again, you want to lock this down with TSIG over some time if you enable the service. And effectively, it goes in and gives you some statistics about your server, the type of queries, incoming, outgoing, server statistics, and pretty much everything about that server that you're going to possibly need to go in and troubleshoot and see information. And because we turned on zone stats, we also now have all of the individual zones that we can see, and it expands on those individually so that we can see further what their zone queries are, the types of queries, and so forth. So we can kind of break that down into all of its categorical updates and using the charts and so forth. All right, so that's it with this video. And, I will get back into the other video where we'll get into the templates and get into some of that automation of how and you provision through the process and what all those factors entail, kind of bringing together maybe multiple different teams or multiple processes into a single process that then allows you to provision and do things for all of your subnets. Say for a whole new site, all of its subnets, its IP ranges, DHCP, user-defined fields, and so forth. So all of that kind of in a single task to what we call sites. And it uses organizational templates to help you define these things. And so that's what we'll kind of try to get to cover next. And then I want to kind of end this series of the quick start, although we've gone through a couple 30-minute sessions, and get really more into some of the technical capabilities and into the API, some automation, maybe ways to start considering how you organize data with automation in mind, specifically so that your server teams and hosting teams can provision VMs on their own. They can use the DevOps type tools, and I can start showing you how we can interface at that level. So we may have to go through one or two more of these quick start videos, but at the end we'll get down here quickly, I think, and get into the really the guts of everything behind the scenes and how things work. So take care, and hopefully I'll see you another video today, and if not, hopefully over the weekend we'll get one or two set in. Great. Take care, and see you in the next video.